Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have Dave Trumfio. Dave is a producer, recording engineer, mixer, musician, multi-instrumentalist, best known for his work with his own band, the Pulsars, as well as producing some artists such as Wilco, the Mekons, which he later joined, and he talks about that during the interview, OK Go, Built to Spill, and many more. Also, during one of the Wilco sessions, it was the Billy Bragg and Wilco Mermaid Avenue sessions, and tells this beautiful story of seeing Californian stars come to life. Dave does this out of his studio, King Size Sound Labs, but we're here to talk about Dave's band, the Pulsars. The Pulsars were formed in the 90s by Dave and his brother Harry, and they were alt-pop rock group, using electronic instruments and guitars, writing simple compositions with really catchy melodies, and zany, insane topics, right? We're going to hear one of those tunes. So before we get to that, a little bit about them. They got together, they started, it was kind of a low-key thing for the brothers. They put it together and they blew up, right? And they got all this success and notion. They got signed, and for years, they didn't have rights to the masters, but now they do, and they're re-releasing their first record, the Pulsars, the way they wanted to do it. Now, that's a quick summary of it, and we get into that story during the conversation. We're going to listen to a tune from the Pulsars. This is Silicon Teens. England. Silicon Teens, the band's of Pulsars. Their re-release is going to be available everywhere on all streaming platforms and vinyl and such. If you go to the Pulsars website, you can get all the information on that. The Pulsars are also going on tour, and they are making a stop October 15th at the Beachland Tavern. So if you're in Ohio or the surrounding areas, that's the spot to catch them. But if you're not, check their website. Their tour dates will be posted there. Now, this was a really fun, enlightening conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think you guys will as well. If you hear what you like, if you can like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Dave and sharing their insights with you. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Dave. Well, to jump into it, I wanted to ask, so your dad traded dental work for some of your early equipment?
Yes. Yeah. So my brother and I were like showing a very strong interest in music, and, you know, to the point where we were borrowing neighbors like Sears guitars and, you know, taking cookie tins and putting BBs in them and filling Tupperware with water and hitting them and trying to have a band. And my dad had a client whose wife needed a lot of work after a car accident, and you know, just kind of got to talking and said, "Hey, my sons are." He owned a music store, and my dad's like, "Well, my sons are really wanting to get into music, and, you know, they want a drum set and a bass and a guitar." One thing led to the next. That's what happened. Yeah, he said, "Hey, well, why don't we trade some of it?" So.
I mean, that's awesome. Aside for the poor
like the
lady.
1800s.
Yeah. But okay, so before that, you guys already had this kind of like natural bug for music then.
Oh yeah.
So what was it that pulled you in?
I don't know. I was just always just super fascinated with music from like my earliest memories. My grandpa actually owned a company. It's called Vogue Electronics, and they did a lot of like the mid-century music consoles for like Sears and all the catalog companies. So we always had this like really cool like stereo in the basement that my grandpa made, and it was like these huge like I mean, they're his own brand, but they kind of like, you know, like nowadays, like people collect like old tech Lansing speakers and things like that. So we had this like really cool mid-century stereo, and my dad and his brother and sister collected a whole bunch of 45s back in the 50s, you know, like Chuck Berry and all, you know, the Elvis, the whole 9 yards, like a bunch of blues stuff. And so we were just kind of discovering music from these little 45s and putting them on the stereo. Like just probably my earliest memories. And my dad and mom like saw us like getting into it, and then a friend of my dad was the band leader at the Playboy Club back when that was a thing.
Yeah.
And they would have like Sunday brunch where like he would actually like his jazz combo would play. And so my dad like took us down for Sunday brunch at the Playboy Club when I was about 7 or 8. And Harry was around 6 or 7. He's a year younger than me. And we basically got the table right in front of the band.
Whoa.
And it was over then. It was just over. It was just like, you know, my dad's friend was playing a Rhodes, and, you know, there's a guy playing a P bass, and, you know, like the total brushes on like Sizzle Ride drummer, you know?
Yeah.
And it was just like, whoa, like it was just crazy. It was mind blowing to me to see people playing music that close and like being kind of part of it, you know, because he was like always kind of like leaning over and talking to us and stuff, you know. So it's just like kind of like, whoa, like this is a thing, you know?
Yeah, but what an amazing like high fidelity kind of like intro to music, you know what I mean? To like have this like this thing your grandpa created to experience music, and like it have like it almost seems like from the rip you guys were involved with it, you know, involved in the process of like being in it. And as a musician, and I know, you know, as a musician, when kids are there, you're like, you can't believe kids are at this show. You're like, what's up, kids? You know, like you can't.
Well, this was the 70s. This was the 70s, and it was a way different time, you know. Like, you know, yeah, there were Playboy bunnies serving.
Like, oh my God!
But in like the classic like black, like, you know, like the fishnet pantyhose with like the kind of your classic 50s bathing suit with the little bunny rabbit tail, you know. And then, like, it was like nothing. It was like, oh yeah, you know, go to the Playboy Club, family fun on a Sunday brunch.
That's crazy. Well, yeah, that's well. What type? I gotta imagine it was kind of jazzy, right? What was the style of the music?
It was like, you know, yeah, it was totally like lounge. It was a lounge band. I mean, I can't remember specific songs, but
yeah.
You know, it was very much the standards, and, you know, I think there was a tenor sax player too. So it was like Rhodes, tenor sax, drums, and bass.
Yeah. It's like those wild things, like you look back at it and you're like, how the fuck did we get away with this? Like, but when you're, you know what I mean? Like,
no, I mean, it was just like, let's bring the kids and show them a band, you know?
Right.
I mean, it's etched in my brain. Like the table had really cool bucket seats, you know, like with the little like ball rollers on. I mean, really low to the ground, like shag carpeting. I mean, it was like right out of like a James Bond movie or something, right? Or like an episode of Love Boat or something. Like, you know, it was like really funny. But it's really, really like in my brain. Like, I mean, I'm thinking of it right now. Like, you know, I could just reach out and touch the drums, or you know, we were really close to them, you know, like we're within like 3 to 5 feet to anything, you know.
Wow, man. So okay, so that definitely made music a touch. Well, in this case, a very reachable, touchable thing. So like when you started playing, or when you began to like adventure in playing, was it what did you reach for first? Was it keys? Was it drums? Was it guitar?
Well, for me, I was just so dead set on having a band that I was ready to do anything. Like I was just like, okay, what do you gotta do to have a band? You know, like, we had a piano at our house, so, you know, I would start kind of like playing around with the piano. Then, like, you know, kind of like in grammar school, when like it's like everybody's kind of getting introduced to like instruments, like this is back in the 70s, and it was the music programs in schools were just way more amplified than they are now. So at some point, it might have been 3rd grade or 4th grade, it was like the music teacher came in with all these different instruments and kind of like started going, hey kids, like you could do this. Like we have a violin, we have this. So a friend of mine went into playing violin. I always wanted to play guitar. But my hands weren't big enough. So like we'd go into the music store and they go, well, you're gonna have to wait till you're 9. When you're 9, your hands should be big enough, you know?
Yeah.
And at like my 9th birthday, I go into the store. My hands weren't big enough yet, but they're like, okay. I'm like, I'm 9, you know?
I did it. I can ride the ride. I'm tall enough.
So like I got this like Epiphone like acoustic classical nylon that had like a thinner neck than any of the other classical guitars, and I still have it. I mean, I'm in my studio right now. I'm looking at it. You know, it's like it was my first guitar when I was 9, and you know, and so like I was able to kind of, and you know, my hands are pretty small. Like never, like you know, I have kind of short, stubby bass player hands, basically. You know, like you know, I shouldn't say that, but you know, like my hands are snack sausages, you know, and so I never was able to really get like super proficient at the guitar on like a super like LD Neola level or anything, you know, like it was like kind of like I cheat an F, I cheat a B, you know, like I have my cheats, you know. You know, when I start trying to play some of the, like the jazz chords, it's like, I can just I can kind of fake that. But you know, I like to say like I kind of bullshit on everything enough to write songs, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a bass player technically in high school, like, you know, and I could have took it all the way through college. Played string bass, you know, with the orchestra and jazz band, you know, all that. So I would say I'm probably, as a trained musician, I'm a bass player. I can read bass clef pretty proficiently, but on everything else, I'm kind of a bullshitter, but just enough, you know, enough to like be a musician and write songs, you know, and
which is the goal. That's the goal, man.
Exactly.
Like that. I mean, sorry.
I'm from far from like, you know, get that guy to come in and play on this session because he's gonna rip, you know. I'm the guy that writes the song and then gets the other guys to rip on it, you know.
But I think that's a way more challenging kind of like place to be, like to be kind of putting it all together, orchestrating it. You got to think in a more like who's the right fit. It's a more abstract way of thinking than it, like when you're like tunnel visioned with an instrument. Like you're kind of thinking of what you can do and what you've been working on and what your perception is of like what to play over this, right? So there's already it's convoluted with a lot of different things, you know.
Yeah, you can kind of get in your way. You can get in the way of yourself, you know, with your technique and stuff. Yeah, so I mean, like I think I was producing from day one because I ended up playing bass because nobody wanted to play bass. Yeah, so I'm like, and I wanted to have a band,
right?
So I'm like, okay, I'll play bass. So we had to have a band, you know.
And as a bass player, you had more bands than you knew what to do with because everyone needed you.
Exactly. I mean, by the end of high school, like other schools were hiring me to play their musicals and stuff because there was just like not enough bass players that could like read, like, you know. I mean, I did every musical under the sun at that point. I mean, I knew the Participants, Ants, and all of them, you know. So it was like, you know, so. Yeah, I could have went on to like, you know, I had a couple offers from some music schools and, you know, like, so like, you know, I could have like took the bass playing like all the way, but I didn't. I decided like I wanted to focus on songwriting and by that time, by the end of high school, I was already like full into multi-track recording and recording other people's bands. So I was always wanting to be more of a producer, songwriter type person.
Was it so? Like, and it's interesting. Like, kind of like because the music, the academic route like it's very parallel to the kind of like DIY route. They like it's very adjacent. The skill sets apply, but they kind of like. There's this kind of tunnel vision of this like outcome in both I guess in the DIY kind of approach to it, you don't know what's going to happen, but then in academic there's kind of like this goal that you're trying to strive towards. I mean, I guess there's a goal in both to succeed in some way, but I feel like the academic route, it's much more concrete vision of where you're going to stick your landing. And like, I always find it's really interesting to like, because guys who I've met who've like stuck with the academic route and then continued teaching, went all the way with it, they kind of like, some of them, not all of them, but some of them are like, man, I wish I would have wrote my own shit because I can't do this now. It doesn't pay. So I don't have any excuse to go do my own stuff. But I'm like, man, do you hear yourself? This is why you do it. Like,
yeah. And our younger brother, Dominic, ended up going to Northwestern and getting a master's in woodwinds, you know, so he's like a full-on academic, like first call player in Chicago for woodwinds, and
wow.
Runs St. Patrick's church in Chicago. It's like probably one of the biggest Catholic churches. He's the music director there, and still does like, you know, still does the plays, and, you know, like first call runs. Like I know he was just on Wicked not too long ago. He toured with Les Mis, so he went that way. He definitely went that way. And, you know, he can look at a score and he conducts the choirs and does all the music programming, you know, and it's just a different part of your brain, you know. It's a different thing. I mean, at the end of high school, kind of going into like when I first struck out, like moved to the city, like I couldn't wait to get out of the suburbs. We lived in the suburbs. So I was just like, you know, but by the time I'm 19, I'm, you know, pushing the envelope, getting the hell out downtown, and you know, just hanging out with like people who are into music but not musicians, and discovering, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, and like that period where like indie rock started coming out, and like the punk rock ethos from like the 70s kind of like fully took to like, you know, by then it was already, you know, 10-15 years in, and you know, like the early indie rock of the late 80s, early 90s was like kind of like so DIY and no rules, you know. And there were like a lot of bands that were really, really crappy players, like from coming from like a technical side, like playing in jazz band and all this stuff, but like we're writing some of the best songs I've ever heard, you know. And it kind of clicked with me. I'm like, oh man, like writing a good song has nothing to do with being a good player, you know. And if you can squeak out like 3 chords, you can write a song. So I kind of had this weird like transformation from like the academic kind of approach to music to like just losing all that and like starting from scratch.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah. Was there a band that kind of like brought that insight to you that you can recall?
Totally. I mean, there's a few bands like from that era. I mean, one that really stuck with me was, and because they're so like outsider and weird, but I love their songs, is a band called Beat Happening. They're from like Olympia, Seattle, and actually Kurt Cobain was a huge fan of them. And they were like putting out cassettes, you know, like by like the early 90s, late 80s, they got people putting them out on CDs, and he ended up starting a label himself. But like it's a super raw, super like, you know, like just, I mean, if you hear it, like most people would think it's garbage, but until you start like singing the songs to yourself because they're so good. You know. And then there's other bands like Pavement was a huge influence, like their early stuff. A label called a record called Slanted Enchanted. It blew my mind. I was just like, who are these guys? This is music. I don't know where this music is coming from, but you know, and the production quality was like pretty lo-fi. And to that point, like I was like trying to make stuff sound like as like hi-fi as possible. And then it kind of gave me a different look. You know, a big band for me around that time was the Pixies.
Okay.
You know, like Surfer Rosa blew my mind, Steve Albini, and that whole like, wow, like, you know, the drums just sound like they're in the room. And like, you know, up until that point, I was like really like into like kick drum, snare drum, really getting like the idea of like just a drum like as one sound in a room as a recording engineer. was kind of foreign to like people coming up through the 80s, you know. So, you know, I mean, so like, you know, that kind of shifted me like as a producer, engineer, songwriter, that whole era, like probably like 1988 to like 92, where it was like a huge like education to me, from other people like in the music that didn't necessarily have like the trained upbringing that I had.
Right. But I think that's the perfect balance of both, is knowing that stuff and then knowing the rules that break the rules. But that's
Yeah.
like, those are, all three of those bands are super, super tight. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
I can definitely see how that would rock your perspective on that. So you started the first King Side in your basement, right?
Yeah, king size. Yeah. Uh, so basically, at my parents' house, I had, cool. Um, yeah. So I've always, you know, I got a 4-track really early. Same music store that we got all our instruments. I ended up working at the music store. It's a music
Yeah.
store called Music Gallery in Highland Park, Illinois. And so when I was working there, like when the first 4-tracks were starting to come out. And so I got like a 4-track. So I always had a 4-track. And at some point I moved to the basement of our family home. Like I literally moved down there. I put my bed down there. We had our band practicing down there. I had a little, like one corner was like my little setup with the 4-track. And that kind of turned into an 8-track, then turned into a 16-track. You know,
Yeah.
and you know, I was making recordings, and this is all in my parents' basement in the suburbs. And I was making recordings, and other bands were hearing the recordings, and they were like, "Hey, can you record us?" You know, so I kind of fell into like the whole engineering production thing by like just doing it and other people hearing it and going, "Hey, we want that too. Can you do that?" So, you know, by the end of like leaving my parents' house, moving to the city where I moved into a home, a rented, like this old Victorian house with a bunch of friends. And I just kind of did the same thing. I'm like, okay, there's a basement. It's unfinished. Okay, cool. Let's go down there. Like we'll make a studio down there. So that's where I kind of started really kind of getting into like the Midwest Chicago indie rock scene. And started meeting like indie labels and recording stuff for them in that basement. That was a couple of years, and then we eventually moved it out of there, and that was called King Size Recording Den. Um, I always kind of called it the King Size Recording Den. And so then we ended up getting an actual space in Wicker Park. And at the time, Wicker Park was on the rise. It's the area of Chicago that like a lot of bands lived in the early 90s. So we were just like, oh, let's go build a studio in Wicker Park. And so that was around end of 92. Like we were like fully going to like brick and mortar out of the basement.
And where did King Side come from, the name?
King size, I don't know. I just thought it was stupid. I mean, I don't know. It was I was like king size, like, hey, it's big. The sound is big, you know. I mean, the original logo a friend made of ours was kind of like the Everlast kind of logo, like you know, hey, king size.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So, yeah, you know. So I mean, you know what? You can't when you do these things. It's like like the name PULSARS. You know, it's like.
Yeah.
Once you do it, and it kind of like sticks. And like, even though I mean, I'm coming to terms with PULSARS, but there was many years in between here. I'm like, I don't like that name, you know. It's like, but like, you know, or King Size. I'm like, I don't like the name King Size. Like, we're 30 years in, and it's like, I don't really have a choice.
Right. Yeah, at one point you're stuck. But I mean, like, I guess it's a blessing to have something that stuck through that long. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So okay, that's a really interesting like point, like to be like kind of producing other bands, and like with that first session you did for someone else in the first location in the basement, what like as you're working with another group that isn't your own, was there something that kind of like stuck out to you that you find that still is, was there like an insight here, like, oh, this is easier to work on someone else's stuff, or like I can hear where the song's trying to go? Like, was there like any insight from the initial working with someone else for the first time in that, like, hey, can you make us sound like that?
Yeah, well, a lot of times, like, I was working with like my peers, really, but they were kind of looking to me because like I kind of knew something that they didn't know, and like I knew how to work all this stuff. And you got to remember, this is like way before laptops, way before affordable recording equipment. Like the home recording stuff was really primitive compared to what it is now. So like when I actually had 16-track multi-track in my basement, which I ended up working at the store and bartering my paycheck for this stuff. But I was like, I'm hooked. I'm doing this. Like, the idea of like this guy who's like 17 or 18, whatever I was at the time, with a 16-track in the basement was kind of like really foreign. So I'd get people coming in and they'd be kind of looking to me, like to kind of guide them and like bring them through this process. It's the first time they've ever multi-tracked in many cases. So it kind of stuck with me over the years. Like, my job is really to kind of shepherd the process for people and make it fun and make it like not intimidating to people. Because like I remember the first time I went into a real studio, it was like kind of like weird and like, it was kind of sterile and just, okay, guys, you set up over here and da da da, and like, and I kind of learned over the years, like, when I do that, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it this way. And my way has always been like, hey, this is fun. And, don't worry if you don't know what's going on. I know what's going on. I'll make it fun for you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So that's kind of been my approach. Like, and now a lot of people are more educated. A lot of people have home studios. A lot of people, they know how to use DAWs and understand the concept of a, signal flow and all that kind of stuff. So, even know more about mics than most people knew back then,
Yeah.
So it's a different time now. And so, but I haven't really changed my approach. I mean, I'm just like, okay, well, what do you guys want to do? Like, and you're like, oh, you have this thing. I've only seen pictures of it. Okay, let's use it.
Was it like, I think because as someone who's recorded a lot, one thing I find comforting is like someone who's kind of there with you. Like, it's almost like, I almost got to imagine your gig in that sense is kind of like a psychological like support system in a strange artistic way,
Absolutely. I mean, the job as a producer is like 60% psychology. Like I tell younger people who like are interning at our studios, or my, the assistants I've had over the years, like, it's like maybe 40% technical and like knowing your stuff, 60% like being able to hang and make people comfortable, and it's psychology,
Yeah.
I mean, it's more that than like, okay, great, you can get a great drum sound, but can you hang with somebody in the room for 10 hours?
Right.
People want to be around you for 10 hours a day in a session for like 3 weeks. It's like that's way more important than like, your kick drum sound,
Yeah, no, for sure. Because like that's the you're coming from a live performance. There's like this whole like kind of mindset you get into, and then there's this whole experience that's there. And when you like kind of put it in the lab per se, and like you're isolating it and like really like taking away that mindset and that feeling, it's strange and like uncomforting. So I think that's an incredible mindset to have for doing that gig.
Yeah.
So I guess like as a songwriter, being a part of like everyone's kind of production of their songs, like slowly, how did that affect your own songwriting?
I mean, you grab your influences from all around you. And like, if I was recording bands for like 6 months straight, like a lot of my like tastes and like ear kind of went with the projects I was on,
Yeah.
So, like a lot of my early recordings, like really influenced where I went in my songwriting, and even to this day, it's like, it's when you're in the heat of, the battle per se, like making a record, and back in, like, nowadays it's so like, oh, you're going to be at your home studio and you're going to whittle away and stuff. Back like in like the 90s, for example, like you go into the studio for 6 weeks and you come out with a record. It wasn't a lot of like, oh, let's save that mix and tweak it 10 times, like 10 versions. It's like at the end of the 6 weeks, you're mixing for the last week, and that's it. It's like there isn't all these revisions and this and that. So it's a very like flow, like, you're making this thing, and at the end you're going to come out and the sausage is made, and it might not be the best sausage, but it's the sausage you made,
Right.
So, I spent just coming from the songwriting side, and in some cases I was hired and people said, hey, we want you to produce this, or, we're going to produce it. We're going to co-produce it, or, we want you to engineer, we're producing it. So you kind of at the beginning set those boundaries, but in the cases where people are like, hey, we want you to produce, I would be adding to songs all the time. I'd be like, hey, that part you did there, this part, that should be the chorus, and you should like do that a bunch,
right?
Because that's a really good part. And like we would be like arranging and shaping songs in the studio, and like hindsight's 2020, like in the 2024, day and age where everybody has like co-writes and like there's 8 writers on every pop song. Back then it was like, it was unheard of for me to be like, okay, so like I wrote that song and I'm going to get 50% of it. I mean, you could do that, and there were people that would do that, but they wouldn't be working a lot.
Right. They're not coming back to that studio.
Yeah. It's like, I was just like, that was just part of the gig, man. Pay me my day rate. It's work for hire. And you know what? You wrote the part. I'm just telling you to do it again.
Right. But it's that outside perspective is so like important when you're tunneled vision in the band, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So like my job is like to be that third year and kind of come, do that. And so yeah, I mean, like, even though like, for instance, the Pulsars, we haven't been active and I haven't really been putting out my own records since the 90s. I've been doing it all along. Like every record I work on, I'm like writing, I'm involved on some level, like creativity wise. So like, a lot of times people are like, well, what have you been doing for the last 20 years? I'm like, making records, just not my records.
Was, I guess, so until the Pulsars, what were you in other bands as well? Like, were you
I mean, Harry and I played in 6 bands before the Pulsars,
Okay.
So, we always had a band, and, starting in like junior high, we had a band. We'd have like, we would, in high school, we would kind of like do covers and play dances and house parties and stuff like that. And, like somewhere in, we always were writing our own songs, but, we'd play a show and like maybe 3 or 4 of them would be originals, but like once we kind of got past like the suburban, kid band stage, like we started playing clubs in Chicago, and we had a band called Glory Hounds, which was pretty active for about 4 years or so. Played with Dead Milkmen, played at the club called Cabaret Metro, or they call it Metro now. We kind of got a lot of opening slots there, and we were kind of more like darker, new wave goth kind of sound. Then we had a band called Larry Cash Jr., which was like a very kind of like Jesus Lizard, like no amphetamine reptile band. Like we were kind of noisy and Steve Albini-ish, and I know I'm forgetting other bands, but I also played in a band called Ashtray Boy, which was a project with my friend Jay Nimi and Randall Lee. Randall Lee is a singer from Australia who we met through our friend John Henderson, who ended up managing the Pulsars and who's actually the label where we have a partnership with him to put the reissue out. But he had a label called Feel Good All Over and put out like early Magnetic Fields, Liz Phair, actually put out some early Beat Happening. So like that was kind of like meeting John around when I got that house with friends is kind of like a spark that kind of really catapulted myself into like the scene, the indie rock scene. So out of that house came Ashtray Boy, and I was with them for 3 records. Liz Phair sang on our first record before she was Liz Phair. And then somewhere along in that amalgamation, I started working with the Mekons.
John Langford.
John Langford. So I met him in early 90s and ended up like, I mean, nobody really produces the Mekon record, but I pretty much produced a few records in the 90s. Yeah. I've been a close allied deputy since the early 90s, and then played live with them. Toured with them, but officially joined the band in 2015 when Sarah, their bass player, left. They were like, "Hey, Dave, you're the first call. Like, you should play bass." And I'm like, I guess I'm in the Mekons full time now.
Oh, sick, man! That's awesome. Oh man.
So we just finished a record and it's gonna be coming out next year.
Yeah, a Mekons record.
Yeah, Mekons.
Oh, that's so sick.
Yeah. So and then so that was all happening. And then somewhere in there, I'm like, you know what? Like, I really love synths, and Harry and I always loved pop music, more like new wavy pop, kind of hooky stuff. And at the time in the early 90s, there was a real anti-hook and more, that's when the whole post-rock thing was happening, and it wasn't cool to repeat a chorus 3 times. Yeah. Like, oh, that's a little too catchy. It's a little too sugary. Put a blue note in there. Oh yeah, now it's
there. You go.
Like ruin it. And like, so like Harry and I were like, hey man, let's just like do a project where it's just me and you, and we're just gonna make these 3-minute like throwaway pop songs, like completely disposable pop music. And so that was the whole beginning of the Pulsars. Was like, we're just going to write whatever the hell we feel. We're not going to think about genre. We're not going to think about what's cool. Having keyboards and guitars in your band at that time, you were either a synth band or you were a guitar band. Like you couldn't have both. So we're like, F that. We're going to do both. Like, and because I don't want to play bass, I want to play guitar in this band. First band I ever played guitar in, and so we're going to program the bass on a synthesizer. So that's Pulsars: synth bass, guitar, drums, and then whatever kind of little bells and whistles we would like program in there, and it was the first band we really didn't care about. We didn't care if we played a show. We weren't going to take a picture and try to do a press kit and try to be real band or anything. And of course, it's the first band that people actually were like, "Oh, whoa, what's going on here? Like, you guys got to play with. Can you open for Blur?" And we're like, yeah, we can. Yeah, I guess we'll do that."
But that's what's so crazy. It's like the thing you don't like, where you put not that you don't put effort into, but you don't put like expectation or like like when you're so focused on getting the thing right, you know what I mean? And like you put all this time and you finally get it right, and then it's there. And then sometimes it's just the gigs where it's just like no one's there, that you just play amazing. It's like that, but with a band's direction. Like,
yeah. I mean, like, it was the first band, like, we didn't really care to the point where, like, when people were asking us to play gigs, like, we were like, well, and this is back when, like, you would never want to play a weekday show, Right. I mean, now it's like, I'm booking a tour right now for the fall. I'm like, Tuesday? Yeah, we'll do Tuesday in New Orleans. Yeah, New Orleans on Tuesday. Let's do it, But like, we kind of were just like, so like, we don't really give a fuck that like, it was like, oh, we only play weekend shows, and we only will, if we open for someone, they have to be like a really big band. Right. And then, that's kind of what we just said, like with some attitude.
Yeah.
And like we opened for Oasis, we opened for Blur,
Oh
we opened for Weezer, we opened, it was just like, oh, okay, that's, we got stuck as the opening band, but like that's what happened, and
but still, that's a pretty rad place to be. Like, you know what I mean? It's like when you talk to anyone that's like, oh yeah, to do music, you just got to open for bands that are bigger than you. You know how hard it is to open for a bigger band, man? Like, you got to fight at the venue's door before they let you in. And then when they're
the funny thing with the Pulsars is like, we were one of the first like modern two-piece bands, it was before the White Stripes, it was like all before that, and like, obviously you had your OMDs and you had your synth bands, but like we were like, Harry would set the drums up at the front of the stage next to me. And so our first gig, we just go, hey, let's go out and try this stuff live. And it wasn't an open mic, but it's this guy, Fax Douglas, had this night called Fax After Dark. And it was at Lounge Acts in Chicago, which was a really old, a popular indie rock club from the 90s, probably the coolest Midwest indie rock club at the time. And we're like, yeah, let's just go try it in front of some people, like it was like totally not like we're just like, we just called Fax like that day and said, hey Fax, can we jump on the bill? And Fax would do like these like kind of variety nights on like a Monday night, like a total off night. And there'd be like spoken word, somebody like, slithering around on a paint, like human paint canvas. It would be like this weird like variety show. And so we go and play the show, and it just so happens like two really big Midwest promoters were there having a beer.
Whoa. Oh my God. Yeah.
Like, they just went in there to have a beer, and like we come on and they're just like, whoa, who the fuck is this? And they kind of came up to us afterwards and were like, what's your story? And like, oh, this is our first gig. They're like, oh my God, we love you, and like they love the fact that we could set up on the front of the stage. So for an opening situation, people with their back lines and stuff, you're not like having to like try to cram a full band in front of a back line, and and we prefer, and that's like to this day we prefer, like if there's a drum riser, we don't use it. We'll put our TVs and stuff on there, the drums are up front. So that just that little freak encounter, like where like we just at the right time, right place, right time, and up until that point we played in a lot of bands and stuff, and so we knew the dance, we knew how to talk to the promoters,
yeah
so like, it's like, people go, oh man, it's just a matter of luck, and like, no, it's the right place, the right time, like enough education, enough, it's a perfect storm situation in all these kind of situations that happen, and that's what happened.
That's incredible. One thing I wanted to ask with the Pulsars, can you tell me how the SDS8 drum affected the sound?
Oh shit, man, you're going deep, dude. Okay, so the Simmons. This is Simmons like drum brain, and it has trigger ends. Now I use it to this day, like when I do dance remixes and stuff. And you can send any pulse into it, so you can send a kick or a snare or just like a rim shot of a rhythm you want, and you can trigger it. So we used it like a lot, like doubling the snare, like a song like Tunnel Song, and a lot of the songs you'll hear like a real snare, but then you hear like behind it, That's the SDS8, so you get that, that kind of thing, and that like layered with like a real drum just to us like gave it like this, what we in our brains called the pulsar sound. We're like, that sounds like a pulsar, yeah.
Whoa. So, that's it.
And then the idea of like the pulsing bass. So when we came up with the pulsars, we're like, yeah, it should be something lunar. For a second there, we were going to be called Nebula,
which is still cool.
We had Quasar, like Quasar, yeah, Quasar's cool. And then but we're like, man, go to like there's like a pulsing sound, like pulsar, and like the whole thing with the SDS drums, and then like the bass lines, and we're like, yeah, okay, yeah, that works. Let's do this. Just one of those moments, And at the time, it was just a kind of inside joke, really. It was just an inside joke that just stuck.
That's incredible, man. Like, it's so one thing that like with these songs, like I've been listening to what Howard sent me and what I can find that's also available. And like, so this, what you guys are putting out is like the mix of how you wanted to put it out, not what the record company like shifted it to, right?
Yeah. So through this whole process, I was like, okay, I would love to remix the record, but the way the masters were, they were split between 24-track 2-inch and like these archival DAT tapes that stored like hard drive information.
Yeah.
That just did not stand the test of time. So we don't have complete masters for the whole thing. So the only thing I did find that was, legitimately like working and everything was the actual 2-track mixes. So every song, and this is back before really mixing in the DAW, we were mixing on a console. We would just print like several mixes, right? And, everyone was a little bit different. Maybe this one has like that element a little more, and, like vocal up, vocal down, that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, it was a total committee that decided on what mixes made the record. And in a lot of the cases, everybody would err for the most conservative, right?
Right.
So where like maybe a few mixes after the one that actually made the record was the one that we were like, hell, this is great. Like with that part's pushed and there's enough grit here. So we ended up going back, and not on all the songs, but probably like 4 or 5 of the songs, we ended up picking kind of alternate takes that like we felt were just a little more exciting sounding. Same exact song. I mean, to like maybe the average ear, like you won't really notice other than maybe be more excited about it or something. I don't know, but like for one element that will be noticeable is I have this Vox, it's a Vox Phantom bass, and it has a built-in Maestro fuzz. And so like a song like Tunnel Song, I think Wisconsin, the first 2 real songs on the album, pretty sure Technology. So basically on the courses, I would just like double the root of whatever chord left and right with this bass. So if you listen, it just sounds like left and right, like just crazy distortion, like kind of distortion. And that's the fuzz bass. And in the original album, we had to tamper that way down. That was just blowing. People were just like freaking out about that. Okay,
that's so sick. Yeah.
This is like a little too crazy. Like, and like, and that was our original vision, I love like My Bloody Valentine and that stuff. And, I just never thought it had enough bottom. A lot of the early, like big shoegazy stuff from the 90s. Like, I just felt like in general, records don't have enough bass on them from the 80s and 90s. So when we got the call the shots, I was like, well, we're going to put a bass and it's going to be huge and fat and stereo, and going to CD, it's fine. I know like for the vinyl cut, we had to monoize everything under like 200 hertz.
Yeah.
But
because the needle jumps out, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, so I mean, having stereo fuzz bass, that probably goes down to like 60 hertz, I would say. So, but like with digital, is like, F it, we're doing it.
Blow it out.
Great. Like, I called it the albatross. I'm like, yeah, bring the albatross in, so these versions of like Tunnel Song, Wisconsin, definitely those 2, Technology. I'm trying to think if any of them would have the albatross. Maybe Runway, but we were just like, yeah, let's use the albatrosses. So That's what's going on.
These mixes like are so awesome. This record's so good, and like it's
Thank you.
like hearing it for the first time, not knowing anything about it, is usually how I jump into what Howard sends me, and I'm like, oh, these guys are incredible. And I just did a road trip to New Jersey. I just went through the tunnel. I'm like, yeah, man, it goes through a mountain. Like, this is great.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, for a while there, Pittsburgh was the morning drive. Like, used that as like a music drop.
Really? Oh,
yeah, because
awesome.
Pittsburgh has a real cool tunnel.
Yeah,
and it'd be like, the tunnel's back up today, you know.
Oh man. So like, I guess with like writing these songs, like because lyrically the melodies are so catchy. Like, I've had Silicon Teens stuck in my head for weeks now, and like the production really brings it out and makes it stand out sonically, unlike any other pop tunes that I've heard. Like, when you were writing these like melodies and these hooks and these lyrics, was it like, did you guys come into this like demo session with all that done, or was some of that on the spot? Like,
so what's really interesting with this band is all that stuff was written super fast. And, you know, some of it's goofy. Like, some of the lyrics are definitely like, yeah, you're just stream of consciously singing this stuff, because that's exactly what it is. You know, I mean, probably like half that record was written in a weekend. So there was a version of the first record that ended up becoming the 2 EPs and the album.
Yeah.
But like, the original record was called My Pet Robot. And we wrote 10 songs like in a weekend, literally like a Friday to Sunday. Like, I had, you know, nobody was booked in the studio. I was like, Harry, come over. Let's just like camp out and like make an album. And that was just like, at least the skeletal form of the album happened over a weekend.
Wow.
And maybe half of those songs are on this album. The other half kind of made it into some of the EPs. But yeah, so, you know, I mean, I was always just like, and this kind of goes back to those transformative years between like educated music and like indie rock. And I just love like bands that just didn't take themselves too serious. And, you know, even like New Order, for example, I love New Order. Some of their lyrics are like, you know, definitely stream of consciousness, you know?
For sure.
And so, you know, so like when the Pulsars, you know, I mean, I wanted to have some depth. I mean, it's, I don't know. I'm looking back at it, like, it's pretty demented in ways, like a way we're jumping around between S&M and going through tunnels and soccer balls and, you know, like computers taking control. And
I mean, that's kind of on point, man. I don't know. Like,
fortune tellers and, you know, destructive women and, you know, like Das Lifeboat. But, you know, like, you know, which Das Lifeboat I wrote like after seeing Nico from the Underground documentary that came out sometime in the mid-90s. I went to go see that and like came home and wrote Das Lifeboat like that night. Like, you know, and like, you know, songs that come together like in real time are always like goosebumpy, the ones that you're going to stick with, you know?
Right.
So that song just wrote itself. Like, "Oh to a Devil," like that was literally one pass. Like the demo of that's just like, boom, there's the song, you know?
Damn.
So, I mean, and that song, for example, all our songs are pretty basic chordally. I mean, some of them are loop songs, like where I would just come up like Submission song is, I'm pretty sure, just the same chords over and over. I will know shortly because I'm getting ready to play live shows. But I just haven't played them in years. But like a lot of them are just like a loop songs, and I kind of got into that concept from Magnetic Fields.
Yeah.
Magnetic Fields did a lot of songs, like their early songs. There's an EP that John Henderson put out, our manager, that is called House of Tomorrow. It's one of the Magnetic Fields' first ever releases, and every song on there is a loop. It's just a 4-chord loop that like he wrote songs over, and that was a huge influence on me as a songwriter at the time, and really kind of went into the Pulsars too. And we ended up playing with Magnetic Fields a bunch, and definitely close allies with them back in the day.
That's like, it is like with a what's the name of the tune? Devil, just escape. Ode to a
Oh,
Devil.
do a devil.
Yeah,
Oh, do
that's
a
crazy. Like, because I'm listening to it and it's like sing like an angel. I'm like, oh, that's a well written line. Oh my god, you know what I mean? Like that's so. But you're so right when things like that just fall into place. And I gotta imagine being immersed in songwriting, even when you're not songwriting, which is your life, what you do, like you're around that process all the time. So even when it's pouring out, like you put your hours in, and I think if the ease of this project, as far as putting these initial songs together, is proof of that. Like,
yeah, I mean, you live and breathe it. And I've been very, very lucky to like be working with artists that are just super creative people through the years. And, I mean, this is like before I worked with Wilco, but, after I worked with Wilco, like, and that's like stuff that our second record that never came out was kind of happening when I was working with Wilco.
yeah.
And, like Jeff Tweedy as a songwriter, like, like in going to this day now, like huge inspiration and being able to work with a guy like that, I worked on like their first My Morning Jacket, like it's actually their second record. It's called At Dawn.
Yeah.
But I got to work with Jim James before he was Jim James, so like, like being able to work with, and obviously the Mekons, John Langford, and work with Stuart Moxham from Young Marble Giants a lot. And we're actually doing a record right now.
Yeah.
It's going to come next year. It's a collaboration record I'm doing with him. Huge influence. I mean, that was Young Marble Giants were one of those bands like with the beat happening and Pavement. Like I discovered them in the late 80s, early 90s. And, it was just like, wow, just a drum machine, bass, and super minimal, and just these beautiful melodies, and so, like that's the guy like I got to work with through John Henderson again. When he had Feel Good All Over, he brought Stuart over, and it's kind of when Young Marble Giants were getting a resurgence because Kurt Cobain loved them. Hole did a cover of one of their songs off their record Colossal Youth called Credit in a Straight World. And so Stuart, so Stuart was kind of getting like some recognition, and he ended up producing a Beat Happening record, so it all kind of came like, oh, hey, Stuart. So Stuart and I have been allies since like probably 91, 92, so and we just met in Spain in May and started a record.
Yeah, that's so sick, man. I guess with that, just that working with that run of individuals, like I get what's some songwriting advice or habits that you've taken from work post or during working with those guys and kind of find yourself still using?
Keep it simple. Like you can embellish stuff later, but like being able to like write a song with 3 chords is key. For instance, I saw California Stars, the Wilco song, the Billy Bragg Wilco, Mermaid Avenue. Like literally all that was just lyrics there. So Woody Guthrie had lyrics, no chords, nothing, like no notes on what the music should be. So basically we were sitting in the lounge at the old King Size in Chicago, and it was Wilco and Billy Bragg and me and Mike Hagler, who was my studio partner, who co-engineered that stuff with me. And he's like, okay, how about this one, California Stars? And we all witnessed Tweedy writing that thing in real time.
Wow.
And it's just 3 songs. I mean, It's just 3 chords, and he's just like, it was, talk about goosebumps, man. I mean, it was just like, whoa, dude. He goes, yeah, I kind of got this idea, and he kind of fumbling around with some chords, and then he's just, boom, he goes into it. And we're in the lounge, and there's no mic in there. But it's only 3 chords, and everybody was so gassed on it that we just went straight into the live room and did it,
Wow.
But
as far as songwriting goes, after you did that Woody Guthrie session, like did you get to like see the notes and stuff? Where you get to like, or did
I was there. I mean, so the King Size sessions. Here's the funny story about that. Like we didn't know what it was. We were working with Wilco on Summer Teeth a bit,
right?
And then we get this call from their manager at the time and say, hey, the guys want to come in and work these dates. And we thought it was going to be more summer heat sessions.
Right.
So like we get a knock at the door the day of, and it's a film crew from, quote, the BBC. And like, we're like, what? They're like, yeah, this is the Billy Bragg session. This is Billy Bragg, right? And we're like, no, it's Wilco. Oh, no, yeah, Billy Bragg and Wilco. So they come in, they start lighting up the whole studio. And we're like, what's going on? We had no idea what we were about to do.
God, yeah.
We had no idea. And then, like, it was like a 3-week session. So it was like we were camping out. Yeah. And so that supposedly was supposed to be the demo sessions. And so we were there. I mean, we were Mike and myself and Wilco and Billy Bragg. He brought his guy, Grant Showbiz, who was like his live sound guy, kind of de facto producer guy that works with him. And like, basically we just all did it together. Like, you know, like Billy Bragg would like pull out like, you know, like we just had all these sheets of like lyrics that they had in a binder, and like hey, like, how about this one? You know, and then like we just all sit around in the control room or in the lounge with a guitar and kind of map it out. Or Billy had some stuff worked up ahead of time. Jeff and Jay had some stuff worked up ahead of time. But like, you know, some of that would just happen on the floor. You know, be like, okay, yeah, here, you know. But you know, like it was all happening in real time. And then like, it would go, oh, that's not quite working, is it? Is it? It's like, it's really funny, man. So the Let It Be Beatles documentary,
right?
What's it called? Let It Be?
Yeah, well, I think it was initially Let It Be, but then Disney Plus put all of it out as Get Back or something.
Something like that. Yeah. Whatever. It came out a couple years ago. So, you know, of course, I've watched that like 3 or 4 times now.
Yeah.
And, you know, any serious music person has. Because just seeing that kind of confirmed my whole fucking life. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, look, these guys are just a bunch of knuckleheads. Everybody's knuckleheads. They're just a band trying to make some music. You know? Because you see them like actually going, oh no, like, oh, that kind of sucks. No, like, I'll try this, you know? You know, so it was like super really confirming to me as a music, like as an artist, like to see the Beatles just being human, right? You kind of hold them up on this like pedestal and be like, oh, they're gods. But then when you actually saw them working, it's like, hey, that's just like every other band, and every other band having fights and, you know, all that shit, you know? So anyways, yeah, I just get to see that on a daily basis. And when I saw the Beatle thing, I'm like, oh man, they're just like every other knucklehead band I've ever worked with, you know?
It's an incredible doc, and it's one of those, I totally agree. It's one of those like humbling, like, even like they had the work to be that good. They weren't just magically the Beatles, you know what I mean? And like, and it's humanizing, just like you're saying. Like, you can totally relate to like, I don't know, Paul, try that one, you know what I mean? Like, so
and everybody getting butthurt. Everybody, you know, everybody in the room got butthurt at one time. You know, it was like, you know, and then you know, obviously the girlfriend's coming in and all that. it's like those are legendary stories that you've heard, and it's just like stories from heaven or something. But then you actually, I cannot believe that footage exists.
Right. And still is like, yeah, or they just put it all out. I mean, it makes sense with streaming stuff now, but you know what I mean? Like, like it is crazy. It is crazy because these are guys you just see pictures of, you know, and to see them move and breathe and be human and just like, it's wild. But this Woody Guthrie session was similar in that sense, as far as like everyone was coming up with Billy Bragg and Jeff Tweedy were coming up with this stuff like on the spot like that. Yeah.
I mean, California Stars, like, I mean, I'm not sure if Jeff worked it out at home like that morning or something, but man, it felt like it was just coming together like fresh right there, you know? So, you know, so I've been really lucky in my career to be around a lot of great songwriting, and it really, you know, Pulsars happened somewhere in the earlier half of that. But it was definitely an amalgamation of, you know, starting with listening to the 45s on my grandpa's stereo, you know, and like those are perfectly formed hit singles, you know, and that shit just melds into your brain, you know?
Yeah.
And I think like part of my like DNA as a songwriter and a producer is goes straight back. And even Silicon Teens, like when I found the Silicon Teens record in like the late 80s, and I was literally just bin diving and found, what the hell is this, and it's literally just a covers record that Daniel Miller, who started Mute Records and ended up signing Depeche Mode, and the guy behind all that, and he had the band The Normal with Warm Leatherette. But this was his first project. He did it literally just so he could like make something and put it out and start a record label. It feels like, even before Gad, and it was just covers. And one of the first songs on it is Memphis, Tennessee, the Chuck Berry song, which when I first heard it, I mean, I almost broke down in tears, because like that was one of the early 45s I would listen to when I was a little kid, and hear it be done all on synthesizers with this nerdy voice. Long distance information, Memphis, Tennessee. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I was just like, mind blown,
But
and that's why I wrote the song. So I'm like, this is a game-changing situation in my life. The fact that you can just make this shit on a synthesizer, you can do this cover, and it's like nothing like the original. I mean, it's the same song, but that's the thing. It's a pop song.
Right.
When you hear both versions side by side, like it's the same song. It's just decorated completely different, right? So, and that kind of like is a huge part of my DNA. Is the idea of a 3-minute pop song. And when Harry and I started Pulsars, it was like, we're just going to write 3-minute pop songs. That's what we're going to do. I mean, That's Lifeboat's 5 minutes, but most of them are 3 minutes and under.
It's interesting. I was just talking with this guy, Sammy K. He's a songwriter, and he does stuff with like the Slackers and the bass player from Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. Like they got a project going. And he was just harping on like this thing about like writing and trying to boil it down to these points. Don't waste time. Say what you're trying to say and move on. And writing all these songs with only 12 lines. And I was like, that's a really one, I think reachable goal. But then you're like, well, at the same time as a reachable goal, it's a really all these lines got to matter. You know what I mean? And but it's such a fascinating journey to start from with these 45s in front of this sound system your grandpa made to being in your own studio, making your own 45s in a sound kingdom that you made. That's what an incredible journey, man.
Yeah. I mean, now that you put it like that, yeah. It's just kind of forming in my brain, just doing kind of putting this out and having to go back and think about well, what was I thinking about? How did this happen? It literally that picture you just painted, it's just kind of coming to focus to me. It's like, wow, man. Yeah.
Well, when you're doing your journey, you don't think about it.
No, you don't. When you're doing it, you don't know. Yeah, exactly. It takes other people to see it, like yourself. Thank you.
Well, Dave, I really appreciate your time, man. It's been a pleasure to dive into your work, and so many of your records. I'd never thought I would get to talk to you, the guy behind a lot of these records that I've dug. So it was a great honor to chat with you and pick your brain. So the Pulsars are going on tour, right?
Yeah, so we're playing a festival in Charleston, West Virginia, called Risers Fest. And that's October 11th through 13th. And it looks like we're going to be playing you're in Cleveland, right?
Yes.
So it looks like we have a hold at the Beachland Ballroom.
Oh, Tavern. Sick, dog. Yeah.
On Tuesday the 8th is, Tuesday the 15th.
Tuesday the 15th. Well, yeah, very cool. Let me know if you get that, and when I put this out, I'll put this out before that, so we can use it to push that show.
Great, yeah, awesome, man.
Yeah, no, that'd be really cool. And the record, and as far as this record that's coming out, it comes out I don't remember.
September 13th, whatever the Friday, September.
Okay.
And then we're going to be putting out some digital singles, and the full digital album should be out like right before we go on tour in the early October.
Awesome. And then is there any projects in the future with other recordings with the Pulsars?
Yeah. So funny thing is, like, Pulsars lasted maybe a total of 6-7 years, and 5 years of that we were signed. So that was like strictly kind of my job, aside from like cherry picking production gigs. So we recorded so much stuff. We had like over like 80 things, like 80 recordings.
Damn.
Songs,
Yeah.
And so we literally have like 5 releases, one of which was Lost Transmissions that already came out. Then we got this record. We got actually 6 records. We have our second record that never came out, and then we have a third record we recorded in like 2009. We got back together just to record, and then we got a covers record, which is really cool.
That sounds.
And then we have an ambient record.
Do you do that Chuck Berry tune? Sorry. Do you do that?
No, I don't. But I do like more like songs from my youth.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of stuff from the late 70s. There's a lot of stuff like, through the 80s, but like we do it in our style. But yeah, so we have a lot of stuff ready to go. So, putting out the first record is a real big deal right now. And it's really supposed to mark kind of the beginning of us kind of steadily putting stuff out over the next 2-3 years.
Well, man, that's super exciting. And I didn't mean to cut you off about the ambient record. That sounds sick too. But I'm excited to hear what comes next. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys and meeting y'all, and hopefully at the Beachland Tavern on the 15th of October.
Yeah, Tuesday, October 15th. We have a hold on it right now. We're putting it out.
Very cool. Awesome, man. Well, I'm going
to hit the pause button. All right, Dave.
Here. Thank you so much, Mick.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig of the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.